Okay, picking up with the Wanderer. Couple comments first. Gotta make focus on what I have up here. I put on D2L, I don't remember when, a few days ago. Don't remember if I announced it or not. A couple different things. One of them was a search of the term coracle image. And so it's a page of a bunch of images of coracles, different kinds of them. People still make them today. Because of what we talked about with the Wanderer, in terms of the boat that he takes, and then the Seafarer, because the Seafarer emphasizes it more, probably the kind of boat that's being talked about, or what gets translated as ship. I really don't think ship is the best translation there. So you have a whole bunch of images of what this kind of little 5 or 6 foot long, 4 feet wide, maybe shallow bottomed raft boat coracle looks like. That's one thing. The other, or another, was a link to the bio tapestry, okay, where you can look at the whole thing. You can zoom it in, you can zoom it out, you can hit, there's a button somewhere on the right, that will show you the text of the bio tapestry, what's written in Latin at the top and at the bottom of it. And when you start, I guess furthest most, I should do it on this way from your perspective, furthest most on the left, and scroll across, you'll see numbers at the top, 1 through, I don't remember what. Those number the panels in the bio tapestry. And I mentioned the other day, it's like 180 plus feet, way off. It's over, one thing on that site says it's over 200 meters. Meters, 39 inches, think a yard. So we're talking over 200 feet long. Wait, that's not right. Not 200 meters. 70 meters.
It says whatever 6,900 centimeters is.
2.5 centimeters to 6,900, whatever. It's long. It's a long piece of cloth. Anyways, in panel 23, okay, you have that image that I referred to. I misspoke the other day. It's not Edward and William of Normandy. It's Harold Godwinson, okay, and William of Normandy. It's Harold who becomes king, promising, before he becomes king, should Edward die without heir, you, William, will become king. This is why William gets really upset when Harold is crowned king. Okay? And again, all the image shows is William, Harold, table-like thing, and down at the bottom there's something, and that's that something that I mentioned is often interpreted as being a Bible. And the words at the top are something like, I don't have it exactly to memory, but it's, here, Harold Sacramentum, William, something like Rex Angliae. Here, Harold promised sacrament, I'm going to use that word, sacraments, to William, King of England. That is, that he'll be King of England. Okay? That word sacramentum gets translated as oath. But an oath doesn't have to be a quote-unquote holy oath, H-O-L-Y, a sacramental oath, but a sacrament's always a sacrament. It's always a kind of a means of grace, that kind of thing. Okay? Anyways, if you want to look at it, it's there. The page that this is part of, that the bio tapestry is part of, gives the whole, I was going to say history, is best we know. For a long time, it was thought this thing was woven by French women, and now the kind of prevailing view No, it was actually woven by English women, probably in England, and then given to, Odo Bio and all this kind of stuff. Let's see, anything else related to all of that? Seems like there's something else that I linked that I'm drawing a blank on. If I did, it's there. Okay, Seafarer. Couple of preliminary comments. Seafarer is often read as a companion piece to the Wanderer. Companion meaning they go together. You can't really read one without reading the other. Okay? In almost all anthologies of Old English, they're printed back to back. They're printed one right next to the other one. They're not next to each other in the manuscript. There are Folio 81 verso and 78 recto, so 79 verso, 80 recto verso. There's roughly a leaf, so think of a page, a leaf and a half. So 1.5, so the leaf has one page, another page. So there are roughly 3 pages between the end of the Wanderer and the beginning of the Seafarer. And I told my first class, I was trying to remember what's between them, and I can't remember. Something way back in the dim cobwebs of my mind says that there are some riddles. Most of the riddles are in one big section, but there are some others in another portion of the manuscript, and might be between these two, not positive. Okay? So in the manuscript, they're not companion. They're not like, point A, point B, end of argument, so to speak. Okay? They are kind of companion pieces, however, in their material. And, well, they're definitely, I guess you could say companion, or maybe corollary, in their conclusions, which we'll see. And if you remember from the other day, I talked about how the Wanderer, with its ending, the last 5 lines, several scholars think that's added on. It's added on by a later Christian monk trying to make the poem more hopeful, because if you don't have those last 5 lines, according to these scholars, the poem's pretty nihilistic. Life's bad, and then you die, kind of a thing. Okay? Don't really think that's the case. I think if you were to say consensus, which is a word I've come to hate, the majority opinion is probably more, those lines are original to the poem. Okay? Seafarer, like the Wanderer, is an elegy. It's a lament. Question is, what is this character lamenting? Or excuse me, what is this speaker lamenting? Because in the Wanderer, it's pretty clear, right? It's especially the first, 3/4, 4/5, 9/10. What's he start off lamenting? Death of his Lord, death of his family, has no home, has to go find it. So lamenting that loss. But it's not just all lament, because that, to use a biblical paraphrase, that mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N, turns into joy when you get to those final lines. Okay. Seafarer. I can sing a true song of myself, tell of my journeys, how in days of toil I've often suffered troubled times, endured hard heartache, come to know many of care's dwellings on the keel of a ship, blah, 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 because we don't get the end of the sentence until line 8A, okay? So, me ich be meselvum, so the rekan, sida sejan, hu ich jeswink dagum ervathwila, oft throwada. Often suffered. The throwada is a word that means suffered. It's not like, yes.
So we're not gonna go through the rest of the Wanderer, like we didn't finish it.
Did we not finish one?
No.
Don't tell me that.
We got pretty close, so we're like right there.
We got to like line 87 or something.
Okay. Thank you. No, of course we will finish the Wanderer. I thought, wow, okay. I'm now wondering if I finished the Wanderer with my first class, because nobody said anything. Huh. So, I guess we finished about around 87. So, 84. The creator of man thus destroyed this walled city until the old works of giants, the into your work that I had up on the board the other day, stood empty. The word for empty there is the Old English edel, okay, which leaves it twice translates as empty. Stood empty without the sounds of their former citizens. And again, I'm going to say this. I don't think empty is the proper translation for edel there. It's the word from which we get modern English idle. Okay? What does idle mean? Did I talk about this the other day? You're saying yes. I saw a head back there go no. So somebody either is dreaming or somebody's not paying attention. One of the two. So I'll say it again. If a car is idling, what is it not doing? It's not moving. What is the purpose of an automobile? To move. To go from point A to point B. If it's just idling, it's not fulfilling its purpose. It's not doing what it ought to do. Okay? So, the old works of giants, the ruined cities, stood empty. What is the purpose of a town? Or to have people in it, to be bustling and thriving. And instead, yeah, they are empty, obviously, because nobody's alive anymore in them. But if the building doesn't have any inhabitants, and nobody ever shows up, it's not what it was supposed to be, without the sounds of their former citizens. Pause. Again, I think these white spaces are rhetorical breaks also, in terms of how they're presented on paper. So he finishes that, and notice that passage began, the wise man. So the wise man is the one who's thinking all of this stuff. And then he who deeply considers with wise thoughts, in other words, the wise man again, this foundation in this dark life. Notice, it's deeply considering how? With wise thoughts. Not he who deeply considers this foundation and this dark life. The word for foundation there is ground. Earth. This world. In this dark life. He who deeply considers this world in this dark life. He modifies the thinking. How the consideration is happening. With wise thoughts. Right? Because you can deeply consider wrongly, foolishly. You could say, this text that I don't understand, or this text that no one in the world understands, obviously because no one in the world understands it, and we can't find any archaeological traces or connections to it, it must come from little green men from out there. That would not be wisely thinking about it necessarily. Okay? So, he who deeply considers with wise thoughts this foundation and this dark life, yes?
So this first line is in reference to this, like he's considering creation.
Yeah, everything.
Who created? Okay.
This foundation, everything in the world and everything in it, and notice this, what kind of life? Dark. Why not this joyful happiness, this wonderful world that we live in? No Disneyfying going on here. All right? So you have to consider the world in life what? Often is dark. Okay? Darker, I would think, for an Anglo-Saxon poet, composer, than for not only literally darker, because they don't have automatic lights and stuff, but harsher. You had to fight more to live. And I don't mean enemies, I mean fighting life, the cold. So, the one who considers this wisely does what? Well, it doesn't do anything yet, because we're going to describe that person who has these wise thoughts. Old in spirit. Now, earlier, the speaker said, what must you attain before you can become wise? Many winters. You have to live through many winters. He says, and so a wise man, line 63, cannot become wise before he has weathered his share of winters in the world. Many people read that to mean you got to be old in order to be wise. In other words, you can't be 25 and wise because you're not old enough. Double your age. Then you maybe. I think, I would have sworn I mentioned in here, I've known a lot of 60-year-olds who are about as wise as this pencil. And I've known some 20 and 25-year-olds who are about as wise as they come. Why? Because you can, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like, wisdom doesn't come with age, it comes with experience.
You've been around the block a few times, even though you're young, you've got a lot of experience. If you've lived a sheltered life, that experience isn't there as much. Okay? So, old in spirit. See, you don't have to be physically old, but old in spirit. Often does what? Often remembers so many ancient slaughters. How do you remember ancient slaughters if you're not ancient? Yeah, exactly. You heard stories about them. The Seafarer says, I can talk about how in days of toil, that's past tense, Beowulf's going to begin, what? Way in Yeardagum in days of yore. Looking to the past. All right? Often remembers any ancient slaughters. That is, thinks of the tales and stories of battles of the past. This is a warrior society. This is the kind of song they're going to sing. There are no Anglo-Saxon poems about love. None. That kind of theme doesn't really begin until 1100 AD or so, primarily in France, and then because the French, and it spreads. Okay. He considers remembers these ancient slaughters, and says these words. Old English version. Where kom mer? Where kom magu? Where kom madum yeva? Where kom simble yesetu? Where sinden siala drimus? Eala birt buna, eala birnuiga, eala theodnus thrym, etc. If you've watched the extended version, you don't have to by any means. If you've watched the extended version of the Two Towers film in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you heard almost those exact same lines in that exact same language. Aragorn sings them as he rides around a burial site. Okay? Why? Because, and I think that was genius. It's almost the only time you'll hear me say that about those abominations on the part of Peter Jackson, by including that. Tolkien does not include that in the Lord of the Rings. He says Aragorn sings a song, and this is what it is in the common speech, but he sang it in the language of the Rohirrim, which is Old English, by the way. The Rohirrim, the Rohan, it's all based on Anglo-Saxon England. So, what's he just said? Merker. We are going to be so far behind. The ubi sunt motif. Anybody know what that means? Anybody have Latin? Where are? Peter, Paul, and Mary. I think it was Peter, Paul, and Mary. 1960s. Look them up. I know you don't know who they are. Look them up. Famous folk group. Had a song called "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" Okay. It wasn't quite number one, but it was pretty big. It was about Vietnam. The flowers, the young men who went off to war and didn't come back, kind of a thing. So, where is the horse gone? So this is him, the person wise in spirit, remembering ancient slaughters. Where is the horse gone? Where is the rider? Where is the giver of gold? Where are the seats of the feast? Where are the joys of the hall? Oh, the bright cup. Oh, the brave warrior. Oh, the glory of princes. Stop? Nothing else? No, we get the next line and a half. But if it was just that, what would it be telling us? It's a rhetorical question, right? Not me, the where are. They're all dead. They're all gone. Okay? How the time passed away, slipped into nightfall. And this is the part, for me, every time it's like a gut punch. As if it had never been. What does that mean? As if it had never been.
Is it like oblivion?
Yeah, but keep going.
There's no trace of it.
Like the old world is gone, and you're in a new kind of life now.
And we don't even remember them. It's like there's no trace of them left. So why, allow you to do psychoanalysis? Why is that a gut punch? What does it really imply? What?
He's gonna be forgotten too.
How many of you have seen? I make all kinds of pop culture references, if it's not clear. One of the latest Disney movies came out 4 or 5 years ago, set in Mexico. And anybody know what the one I'm thinking of? Coco, thank you. What's the basic gist of that?
The Day of the Dead.
Keep going. The Day of the Dead. What happens to the dead when they die? Well, they die, obviously, and
They go into the afterlife, and it's the family's job to remember them. If they don't, then they disappear in the afterlife too.
if they're not remembered,
Yeah.
they really die. The soul evaporates, disappears, as if they'd never been. Just think about that for a minute. No recollection at all of that individual. In the Orthodox, I'm Eastern Orthodox. In the Orthodox Church, one of the most frequent prayers is, when someone dies, you say, memory eternal. Remember them, O Lord, in your kingdom. What does that mean? If God forgets that individual, gone, as if they'd never been. What is one of the, this is culture wide. It goes across all cultures. What seemingly do all people want to know will happen after they die?
Where they go.
Okay, that's one thing. That's probably the first biggie. What's next?
What it's like. That they'll be remembered.
Bingo. They've done something so that people will remember them. What mark have I left? Kind of a thing. Okay? And a lot of that, kind of for us today, arises out of the existential movement in the 50s, 60s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and such. But it's this, again, it's transcultural. It's like every culture has this need to know, for people to know, I lived. You see it in Greek literature, you see it in Roman literature, you see it in Hindu literature, you see it in Slavic literatures, you see it in English, Germanic literatures. This emphasis on fame, glory, not now, not fame now, but to be remembered. Or, as we're going to see with the Wanderer, to have the eulogy said, the good word, after you're dead. Okay? There is no good word. as if it had never been. No good word, because there's nothing for a word to be said about. That's pretty bleak. The wise man who deeply considers does what? Thinks this. Okay? For those who've gone on before. There still stands in the path of the dear warriors a wall wondrously high. Notice the physical product of humanity. It's still here. But the person who built it, long gone. Just saw yesterday. I read a variety of news stuff. Big, huge discovery in Guatemala. Okay? I mean, huge. Doing LIDAR, which is a kind of radar that you use to see through vegetation. They discovered, just like in the last couple of months, this huge complex of buildings. Stretches out over, I don't remember how many square miles. It's like 100. With over 120 miles of roadway, a causeway, elevated road, okay, that goes between all these settlements. This thing dates back to 1000 BC. It's the largest, if I remember correctly, it's the largest Mayan complex ever discovered. But up until that discovery, it was what? As if it had never been. Because the plants and everything overtook it. The people, we know there had to be people, right? Because we have the remains, the buildings that are left behind. There are some buildings, some things around the world, we don't know who built them. Because there's nothing that remains of this culture, other than the buildings themselves. There still stands in the path of the dear warriors a wall wondrously high with serpentine stains. Now that doesn't mean literal stains like blood, does this. It probably refers to a pattern in the construction of the wall. Okay? Why does the wall remain but not the people? All the walls that have been referred to in here are made of stone. Because what happens to timber? It rots, it decays. Stone takes a lot longer. A storm of spears took away the warriors. Bloodthirsty weapons. Notice, not bloodthirsty warriors. The weapons were thirsty for blood. How's that for personification? Weird the mighty. And storms batter these stone walls. Frost falling binds up the earth. The howl of winter when blackness comes. Night's shadow looms. It's night's shadows, if I remember correctly in the Old English. Sends down from the north harsh hailstones in hatred of men. So the weather, what? We're supposed to have freezing rain tonight. This speaker would say the weather what's us? It hates us. Look at the language we still use when there's a tornado or huge flood or hurricane. It's Mother Nature is angry. Like we're not part of nature. One of the weirdest things in the history of human thought is the idea that we are somehow separate from, divorced from the natural world. So that's, line 105. Just one second. That's a pretty positive note, right? I mean, that whole little passage makes you want to just get up in the morning and smile and attack the day. Yes?
I was just going to ask if you think the separation of weather from humanity comes from mythology. Was that?
I don't know. Could be. Look how weather becomes personified in myth. We have thunder. Why? Because Thor is angry. Or Zeus, Mythology, according to many, mythology is an attempt to what? Explain the inexplicable. It's it. There's bright flashes of light. You gotta, what's the reason? I don't understand temperature different, the ionosphere and all that kind of stuff. So there's an angry God. We must propitiate in one way or another, etc. Okay? Don't know. But other than the very commonsensical approach, it sometimes seems like the weather's against us, right? I mean, it's just like, not this year. This year hasn't been too bad. But there have been years when it's just one storm after another. I'm from California. California this year is having the kind of storms I remember growing up in California. I mean, they would happen not all the time, but it would be every 5 or 10 years. You'd have a period of drought, and then you'd have massive storms. And then a period of drought, and then massive storms. It's cyclical in this instance. This has nothing to do with so-called global warming. Go back and read the account of one of the first governors of California, Leland Stanford University. He had to be rowed to the Capitol because most of the Central Valley was underwater because of the amount of flooding they'd had because of rainstorms over like a 3-year period, I think it was. Okay, you can go back and look at the geological evidence. It's drought, rain, etc. Okay. So, blackness comes from the north. All is toilsome in the earthly kingdom. Down here, life's hard. The working of weird changes the world under heaven. Weird. What will be, right? Fate. Notice, fate controls, the speaker says, the world under heaven. Fate doesn't control heaven. Very similar to the Greek system. Fate controls what happens down here on earth. Fate doesn't control the gods. In the Greek system, the gods don't control fate either. It's like you've got the gods over here, fate over here, and humanity down here on the world. And it's like the gods and fate talk, I'm being facetious, and fate tells the gods what's going to happen, and then Apollo goes down to Delphi and speaks through his oracle and says, mess around with Oedipus, and gives the prophecy. Why? Let's watch him run like a rat and see what he does. That's it. They don't control it. Okay? I think, I'm not sure, okay, that the poet here, in talking about weird works under heaven, I literally do not have time to bring this up right now, so I'm just going to mention them. We're going to talk about them more when we get to Beowulf. This is a Boethian idea, named after a Roman writer named Boethius, 6th century, who wrote a book called The Consolation of Philosophy. Like, reading Jean-Paul Sartre is going to make you feel better about life. No, not that kind of consolation, not that kind of philosophy. Where it's just I can't go into it. It's just a Boethian idea about everything has order, essentially, in the world. Everything follows an order, okay? Let me just put it that way. God controls fate. Fate controls what happens down here. In most versions, there's another intermediary between fate and us, Fortune, or the goddess Fortuna, who has a wheel that she's like TV game show. It's been on forever. Wheel of Fortune. It goes back to an ancient idea. Not with the, sexy lady turning the number. Not that at all. Wheel of Fortune is fortune always turns. Where is Oedipus at the beginning of the play? Oedipus the king. He's up here at top. He's the king. Everything's going great. Wheel of Fortune keeps turning. He starts falling. It's the story of every tragedy, all the way. Also, by the way, okay? So, all is toilsome in the earthly kingdom. The working of weird changes this world under heaven. Notice what that is saying. is the result of weird here. What's the verb that's used? Changes. Okay? It changes this world. Right? How is that true? I'm going to go out on a limb. That's true. Not necessarily the weird part, but everything here changes, right? Is today the same as yesterday was for you? Is tomorrow? No. Everything changes. Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, I think, who said, all is in flux. You never step in the same river twice. Because when you step in that water that's flowing, what happened to the water you stepped in? It's now there. It's not the same water. Literally, that's true. Because those molecules of water you stepped in are now, however, unless it's a pond, in which case the analogy doesn't work, because he talks about life as being, like the river. Everything here changes. That's his point. And then he gives us specifics. Here, wealth is lana. L, the letter called ash, okay? N-E, the word from which we get lean and loan. Okay? It's translated as fleeting. It also means transitory. It also means changing. Here. Now this you need to hear in the Old English. It's so pretty. Wanderer. Line 108. Here. Here bith fail lana. Here bith freon lana. Here bith man lana. Here bith my lana. All of this erdan yistal idle, wortheth. Here is wealth, fleeting, transitory, changing. Okay? Here wealth is lean. What's the difference between a non-lean and a lean cut of meat? The lean meat is what? No fat. None of the richness, whether or not you think fat is enriching, none of the richness that comes with fat. Okay? It's lean. Here it's also loaned. That same word means both. What's the difference between something that's, you get a lean student loan, and it means what about that loan? It's not very much. You get a loaned student loan, and it might also be lean, but you also have to do what? You gotta pay it back. Here, wealth is fleeting. Here, friends are loaned. We're going to read a poem later on by Ben Jonson. We're going to read two of them actually we're going to read three actually. No, four actually by Ben Jonson. Two of them are about his two eldest children. About his first son and his first daughter, who both died in infancy. One of them died at 6 months, one of them died at 7 years. So not quite infancy. Okay? And in one of them, he talks about the loan. The child was loaned. Date was due. That is, the promissory note said, and I had to pay back. Wealth is fleeting. Friends are fleeting. Man is fleeting. Woman is fleeting. All the framework of this earth will stand empty, idle. Empty just means devoid of anything, right? Or, more specifically, devoid of humanity. Okay? Idle implies what? According to my translation. Louder.
Static?
Static.
It's just missing life, missing humans, missing.
It's not fulfilling its purpose. Genesis says the purpose is God does all this creation, final day of creation, humanity's put in charge. The old Christian, notion. Don't have to accept it all. But according to that notion, it exists for humanity. Take humanity away, and the speaker is saying, it's now standing idle. It's not serving its purpose. Yes?
This is the only mention of women, right, in this poem?
I think so.
I just thought that was interesting, because as we were reading through this, it seems like a very, manly poem, I guess.
Why? I mean, you're right, it is.
Well, I guess it's just because, talks a lot about being a warrior and...
It's a poem essentially, whether the actual composer was or not. It's by a warrior for a warrior. By a warrior for a warrior audience. Because he talks about the noble lord will understand. The person with a noble nature. He's talking about, all right, you warriors out there, this is for you. I mean, put it in modern society. Take somebody who was a member of special forces. And imagine something that person's going to write. More than likely, or talk about. They're going to write or talk about something that affects them and others like them. They're going to feel more comfortable, maybe, with that kind of, environment. Or, I really shouldn't go here. Cops. Because the only reason I said it, because what happened in Memphis. My opinion, those weren't cops. Just, they had the badge. They had the uniform. They weren't cops. Okay? Every group, no matter the group, has its bad apples. You can't get rid of all the bad apples. But cops talk to cops in a way that they don't talk to everybody else. What do cops consider us? I had my brother-in-law, was a cop for 27 years. Okay? One of the good ones. What do they call us? Civilians. Which implies what?
Lesser than?
No, not necessarily lesser than.
Other?
Implies they're not civilians. So if they're not civilians, they're what? Warriors. Whether you call somebody in the Air Force, somebody in the Navy, somebody in the Army, somebody in the Coast Guard, it or not, they are ultimately warriors. National Guard, warrior. What is your function? What is your job? War. The IOR, one who does. That's it. Civilians are those who are not warriors. Most cops will talk about what they do as kind of warlike. What's the other name? Law enforcement officers. Enforcing, okay? So there's an audience, and this audience is very specifically warrior, it's masculine dominated. But you're right, I think the point about, mentioning women is very interesting. Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, why even put that in there if I don't really get it. And also, in this time period, women have always been viewed as, others in older societies, I feel like, from what I've been taught, at least. But also, were there no women warriors during this time either?
Not really. Well, let me rephrase that. Alfred had a daughter who was kind of fearsome. Her name was Avelflad. I don't remember what Flad means. But she actually took part in some battles. Okay. There was a Viking grave discovered sometime in the last 4 or 5 years. No, take that back. Discovered a long time ago. The evidence was re-examined in the last 4 or 5 years. And whereas it used to be thought this was a Viking warrior, it's a Viking woman with all the accoutrements of a warrior. Shield, sword, mail, the whole 9 yards. Okay? Which is pretty clear she was a warrior of sorts. However you want to define that of sorts. Generally speaking, in terms of the vast overarching evidence, those are the exceptions rather than the rule. Very infrequently would that occur. Now, I think there's one very logical, it's so logical, almost nobody think about it. Reason why woman is included. How fleeting will man be without woman? 60, 70, 80 years. And so he's talking about male-female relationship, the speaker, talking about male-female relationships, offspring. It's going to be even more fleeting without women. Okay? Does that answer? Kind of?
Yeah.
Okay. You would like, yeah, maybe you would. Trying to think how to put this. The wife's lament, which follows the Seafarer, is an elegy spoken by a woman. Written by a man, we're almost positive. Okay? You probably still won't like it because of what is said, because of what happens to her. If we had time, boy, I would really love to talk about it because it's a very good poem. So the speaker goes on. So everything in this world is going to stand empty or idle. Break in the page. Now, at this point, many scholars think that is the ending of the poem. That's the original ending of the poem. And then some monk gets hold of it and says, well, damn, that's a downer. Everybody dies and that's it. No, that's not good enough. Got to Jesusify it, you know. So said the wise man in his mind, sitting apart in meditation. We can kind of go back to the beginning of the poem. Why does the wise man say this in his mind? Because there's no one to talk to. There's no one living to whom he would impart his thoughts. Okay? Sitting apart in meditation. And I kind of wonder if what follows is what he's meditating, what he's thinking. He is good who keeps his word. The Old English there is who holds his truth. Truth there being the word from which we get troth. Like to pledge your troth, old language for getting engaged. Okay? So to pledge one's troth means to pledge your truth, your loyalty to that person. Okay? He is good who keeps his word. And the man who never too quickly shows the anger in his breast, notice, it's not the man who never shows anger in his breast. There's a time for anger, there's not a time for anger. It's who does it too quickly. Unless he already knows the remedy. What's the remedy? A noble man can bravely bring about. So, don't be too angry in your response, too eager, too quick in your anger, unless you know how you're going to, what? Resolve the anger? Release the anger? Get the justice you're looking for, so to speak? It will be well for one who seeks mercy. Consolation from the Father in heaven. Notice consolation from the Father in heaven, that is a positive phrase, appositive, for mercy. What does an appositive do? Not quite emphasizes, it defines. It makes clear what might have been unclear in the previous word or phrase. Okay? So, it redefines mercy, or it defines mercy, exactly what the speaker means. Consolation, that's the word frovra. In this context, I'm almost positive it's frevron. I actually had this up because it's used also in the Seafarer. And it can get translated consolation. It can get translated solace. It can get translated comfort. It can get translated succor, if you want to be all King Jamesy in your language. When the Old Testament and New Testament often uses this word to succor, it means to give aid to comfort, to provide solace, to relieve, so to speak. All right? So it will be well for one who seeks mercy, what's meant by mercy, consolation from the Father in heaven, where for us all stability stands. Now, why the all stability? What did the speaker say just before this little part gets said?
Everything is fleeting.
Everything here is fleeting. Man, woman, friend, where's the horse? Where's the rider? Where's the treasure? Where's the gift? Where's... Nothing here lasts. Everything here is impermanent. By the way, this idea, ancient. And it's going to run up at least through the 17th century literature that we're going to read. John Donne's going to talk about love down here in this world is changeable. It's mutable. Well, it is for some people. It's for sublunary lovers. People who live metaphorically beneath the orbit of the moon. Because it was thought the orbit of the moon is where changeability begins. Outside the orbit of the moon, everything is permanent. Nothing changes out there. Okay? In the 17th century is when that was thought. So, added on, tacked on, to make this hopeful, to make what is otherwise bleak and despairing.
Is it written differently? Is it written differently?
Nope. And there's no break. It just goes all the way through. Okay? I don't think so. I don't think it's what's called an interpolation at all. Because some of these ideas that are in this final bit, you see them woven throughout the rest of the poem. I mean, you can almost go back to the beginning. Again, how do you translate those two words? Are yebideth. Experiences, longs for, expects, awaits. Mercy, grace, favor, earthly prosperity. What does the entire poem say about earthly prosperity? The entire poem doesn't last. I don't think he's talking about that. Unless the speaker is saying, if you put all your eggs in the basket of earthly prosperity, what? You're always going to be longing for it. Why? Because wanting $100 turns into wanting $1,000. Wanting 1,000 turns into 10,000, 100,000, million. Wins. Obama famously asked, how much is enough? Okay? So I don't think it's the earthly prosperity thing. The others, well, mercy, favor, grace. The word that's translated here, mercy. 114. Yep, it's the exact same word we saw at the beginning of the poem. All right. Yes?
Was this written before or after the Pope came and converted people? 'Cause
Yes, yes.
So when I first read it, I thought of the book of Ecclesiastes because it is very similar, and then so that's why I don't think that was added on.
Yeah, it's very Ecclesiastes-ish. Ecclesiastes is one of the books in the Old Testament that's called wisdom literature. It's very Ecclesiastes-ish. It's very Proverbs-ish. It's related to, or very much like another book that is in some versions of the Old Testament, but is not in other versions of the Old Testament. called the Wisdom of Solomon, which is another big group of proverbs, essentially. It just, I'm going to use a verb that applies to smell. It reeks of that mentality. That's why I had written right here the other day, gnomic. It's very gnomic. There's all these proverbial sayings just thrown throughout, okay? To me, to take these words off, you almost then also have to do this very same thing with the opening and say, oh, what the person actually did then is they added these words in these words. And so the way the poem really should be read is probably often alone in the first light of dawn. And it just starts there. Because the thus spoke, I'm one of those who think it refers to what comes before, not what comes after. If I were editing this, my dissertation was textual editing, I would not have a colon after the word downfall. Because that colon is telling you, as reader, this is the way to interpret the text. Everything that comes after that is what the wanderer says, rather than what came before. And it might be both, okay? Does that make it less bleak with the beginning and the end? Modifies it a little bit, yes.
In this last line where it says from the Father in heaven, Father, like, is that a direct translation from the?
Believe it is, 115. Yep. Frovre, that word, Seafarer, to often means from in Old English. Seafarer on heavenum, us ea seal festnung standeth. Wherefore us all the festnung means the firmness, the stability, the fastness, like fortress. Okay? Stands. It's present tense. Right? So, yeah, it's very specific. The Father in heaven. Okay? It's not capitalized, though. You're going to see in the Seafarer, we're going to see the word drishtim that gets translated within 2 lines. First line, it's translated lowercase L-O-R-D. Next line, it's capitalized. Capital L-O-R-D. Liusa does that because of the overall context of the poem, not just the context of those 2 lines. Because it's clear the speaker's talking about 2 different kinds of lords. Okay? But notice one of the things. Consolation is in heaven. Why? Is it only because that's where God is? I mean, that's the big part. It's because God is there that the other part is there. It's what? It's stable. It's permanent. You don't go to, the speaker suggested, you don't go to heaven and then God, 8 billion years later goes, I don't think Sherman should be here. Go to hell. You're there. Permanent get out of jail card, kind of a thing in the life of Monopoly game. Okay, other questions about the Wanderer? I might have to send you a video to cover the rest of the Seafarer, because man, we're going to get so far about it. I've only got one different dream of the root, and I can almost promise you I'll probably take close to 2 whole days, because I'll get off on about runes and the couple of monuments the part of the poem is inscribed on. Now, one thing about both Wanderer, Seafarer, and many of these poems, back to the question she raised, and I think one question you raised. And this is going to make me get even farther behind. Dating. Not, when you go out on a date. When were they composed? We don't know. Let me rephrase that. We don't know the earliest they might have been composed. Of the manuscripts, all the manuscripts I mentioned the other day, all the manuscripts date from roughly 975 to 1025. I think that was the first day of class. I might not have mentioned that specifically. But all the manuscripts date from roughly this 50-year period. Okay? So the poems can't obviously have been written after the manuscripts that preserve them. But they could have been written long before. There are people who argue Beowulf might have been composed as early as 600. I think they're crazy to talk about that, which is another reason why we'll get way far behind. This poem obviously comes after the Christianization, because the Anglo-Saxons were pagan Germans. There wouldn't be a reference to the Father in heaven. They don't refer to Odin that way. It's not heaven where Odin lives, by the way. So post 597, well, that works. Well, you got to give it time for the audience to get familiar and comfortable with this material. Because if you're reciting this, if you're singing this in a hall full of a bunch of pagan, real pagan Germanic warriors, they're probably not going to take kindly to this, well, yeah, well, who's this Father in heaven that's going to give us all stability and peace? No, life down here is nothing but pain and getting everything you can. That's more the Germanic mindset. So, most people, scholars, would say these two poems, probably at the earliest around 800. Earliest. So anytime from 800 on. Dream of the Rood that we're going to do in a couple days, pretty good reason to say 700. And that's because part of the poem survives on a stone cross that dates from about 700 AD. Could have been added later, okay? But we don't think so because the inscription's worn about as much as the rest of the cross and such, okay? Seafarer, probably the same time as the Wanderer. The language used in the Seafarer, and by that I don't just mean Old English. I mean like little dialectal characteristics. Old English survives in a variety of dialects. There's a dialect from northern, what we would call Northern England, Northumbrian dialect. There's a Kentish dialect. There's a Wessex dialect. There's a kind of a, I'm going to call it King James dialect. Okay? Like the King James Bible is written in a dialect of Elizabethan English. It's not the English people spoke every day walking down the street or buying goods. It is intentionally archaic. King James Bible in the translation, all right? Similarly, what's called late West Saxon is largely the dialect that's used in most of these manuscripts. There are some poems that survive in the other dialects. For example, Cadman's Hymn does survive in some Old English, for example, in the Northumbrian dialect. And it survives in the late West Saxon dialect. And there's differences in wording. There's differences in pronunciation, kind of a thing. Wanderer and the Seafarer, pretty much the same dialect. Okay? Late West Saxon. That is that kind of intentionally slightly older and archaic. Like the speaker is trying to hearken back to a golden age. Yes?
But they're not the same author, right?
We don't know.
Okay.
Literally have no idea. We have zero idea of who wrote either of these poems. There are a group of poems. This might have been on that first lecture, video lecture that I sent when I had to miss class. I might have talked about this. There are a group of poems that used to be called, and I'm just going to give up and even talking about Seafarer today, called the Cadman poems, named after Cadman, okay? Because this group of poems is about the material that Bede says Cadman composed poems about. for example. Well, Cadman's hymn, obviously, but Genesis, Exodus, parts of, okay? Daniel, lion's den kind of thing. The Advent, coming of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus. There are several of these. And the manuscript that these are contained in used to be called the Cadman manuscript. Used to be well over 100 years ago. All right? That manuscript is now called by the name of the guy who owned it in the 17th century. Franciscus Junius is the guy's name. So it's called the Junius manuscript. It's at Oxford. Okay? Little side detail. Franciscus Junius. This is important. Later on. He was good friends with John Milton. Anybody taken anything of talking about Milton? Anybody read Paradise Lost? Just pick it up on a afternoon and read it on your own. The entire thing's about this thick. It's a poem in 10, and then later gets revised, 12 books. Big, long poem. To justify the ways of God to man. Okay? So Milton writes it to prove to us why God is right for everything that he allows to happen. And it starts with, creation, and then we see the fall of Satan, the whole 9 yards. Okay? Well, Franciscus Junius was good friends with Milton. Franciscus Junius owned this manuscript. This manuscript has a poem about the fall of the angels. And in that poem, Satan, oh man, you just want to root for the guy. He comes across just fantastically. It's like, now this is the warrior mentality. This is, I'm going to fight. I'm never going to give up. It's, Winston Churchill's never surrender speech, okay, to House of Commons in spring of 1941. John Milton, Book 3, Paradise Lost, takes us to the lake of fire in hell. And we see Satan squished down on the lake of fire, bound. And he's kind of talking to, Beelzebub, one of the other fallen angels, about their predicament. And he's like, if I could only get up here, then I'd show God. And it's like, meanwhile, back in heaven, and God looks down, sitting in his throne, sees Satan, and kind of goes, and smiles. And lets Satan get up. Let Satan get off the lake of fire. So he's no longer bound. And Satan gives one of the greatest speeches in written history. I mean, it'd make the Pope sign up, to follow. I mean, it's just great. It's fantastic. All right? That's in Paradise Lost. In the version of the Genesis story, the fall of the angels, in the Junius manuscript, it's almost the exact same speech. Which has led some scholars to assume Junius either told Milton about it, if Junius could read Old English, or he let Milton read the manuscript himself, because we do know Milton read Old English. One of the few people in his time who did. I'm one of those who say Milton definitely borrowed. I mean, there's too many parallels between what Satan says here in this Old English manuscript and what Satan says here in Paradise Lost. Okay? All right. Other questions? Yes.
When was that written? The Paradise Lost?
1648, 1645 is when he begins it. Milton, 1608, 1674. Tell you real quickly. Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce. I don't think it's first published until 60 something. Samson Agonistes, 71. Paradise Lost, 1667. Yep, and then the 12 book edition in 74. Okay. Love to include Milton, but we have even less time now. Other questions? Okay, Seafarer. Notice, wanderer, seafarer. Do you wander on the ocean? You can. Usually wandering implies down here or on the ground. Seafaring is pretty clear. Somebody's going to be on the ocean. Okay? So it begins with that. I can sing a true song of myself, tell of my journeys, how in days of toil often suffered troubled times, endured heartache, come to know many of care's dwellings on the keel of a ship, etc., etc. Okay? Are we told in those opening lines why the person's on a ship? No, we're not. In the immediate opening lines of The Wanderer, we're not told why the guy has to walk the paths of exile. But we find out pretty soon. We don't necessarily find out pretty soon in The Seafarer why this guy is a seafarer. Takes a little bit longer. Okay? Talking about the keel of a ship makes it sound like this ship's kind of big. But it's probably not. It is probably one of these small little boats that I referenced. And there's a bottom of page 69, there's a footnote talking about sea voyaging that mentions what some of the Irish monks would do. We know of accounts where an Irish monk left Ireland and arrived at Iceland. Iceland, if I remember, it's at least 150, 200 miles north of Ireland. That is across the Atlantic. And the guy's traveling that in this little boat. That's pretty hardy stuff to do. Hardy stuff to do. Okay? So, talks about what he suffers. Pinched with cold were my feet, bound by frost and cold fetters, while cares seethed hot around my heart. Notice the juxtaposition. He doesn't necessarily mean his feet are literally bound by ice. But it could be that there's frost on them. Meaning ice has formed where water sloshes and then freezes after, it runs away, so to speak. So, feet are bound by cold fetters, while cares seethe around my heart, and hunger gnaws my sea-weary mind. Those lines encapsulate what of the human person? Any human person, by the way. Or they discuss what aspects of each individual.
Will.
Possibly more basic than that. What's the first part that he discusses? Pinched with cold were my feet, bound with frost. What are the feet symbolic or representative of?
Your foundation.
Body, flesh, right? He's cold. How do you know you're cold? Body gets cold. That's how you know you're cold. Does your mind just look outside and go, cold, and you automatically feel cold? I mean, even if there's snow outside, you don't look at snow and go, brr. I mean, you might metaphorically. Looking at snow doesn't make you physically cold if you're inside in a temperature-controlled environment. It's being outside in the cold. It makes the body cold. So, body, physical flesh, right? While care seethes hot around my heart. Is he talking about the literal heart? No. What does it mean to seethe? It's a cooking term, by the way. But you know how it's used? We don't generally use it to refer to cooking anymore. We use another word that I think comes from French. It's to boil. If something is seething, it's boiling, it's bubbling. All right? So these cares are doing what? They're boiling his heart. This guy's really troubled internally. All right? And hunger gnaws my sea-weary mind. Is there a problem with that language? Why isn't it, and hunger gnaws my sea-weary belly? You would think the gut is what would be hungry, but he says his mind is what is gnawed by hunger. So, body, mind, soul. That's kind of the whole human person right there. That man does not know, he whose lot is fairest on land. Kind of a gnomic passage. How I dwelt all winter, wretched with care, on the ice-cold sea, in the paths of exile, deprived of dear kinsmen, hung with icicles of frost while hail flew in showers. The hung with icicles of frost, what's that hanging from? Could be his beard. It's the eye. It's the speaker. Okay? Have we been told why he's on the paths of exile? We get deprived of dear kinsmen. Does that mean they're all dead? Might not. Your gloss tells you a half line or more, or half line may be missing here. Notice, maybe. There's not a break in the manuscript. Oh, that's the other thing I posted. I posted an image of the Wanderer manuscript, the opening of the poem. Yeah, Wanderer, not the Seafarer. I could do the same for the Seafarer, I think. Because there's no break. There are times in some Old English texts where you've got the writing going along and it just goes from margin to margin. Okay? And there will be a line and then it stops and the next one picks up at the very next margin. There is some indentation in some manuscripts to indicate kind of a new beginning, a new section here, or a large initial capital to indicate a new stanza, so to speak. They don't really have stanzas. But there's nothing here that indicates something's missing. It's just scholars/editors think there's something missing because there seems to be something missing in the sense of the poem. That is, there's not a completion of an idea, so to speak. Where we go? Deprived of dear kinsmen, hung with icicles of frost, while hail flew in showers. Deprived of dear kinsmen just means they're not with him. Okay? I heard nothing there but the noise of the sea, ice-cold waves, wild swans' song, sometimes served for music. The gannets call, the curlews cry for the laughter of men, seagulls singing for mead drink. Does that echo anything from the Wanderer? Saw a couple heads do this. What? When he wakes up from his dream, and in the dream he saw his friends, he saw his gift-giving Lord of old, and he wakes up, he sees those seabirds, and he thinks they're his friends. And then they do what? They stretch their wings, and they glide away, and his friends disappear, and he's all alone again. That wanderer, that character, speaker, is the way he is because they're all dead. Every last one of the people he knew are gone. Okay? This one's not the same. So this one, he sees the swan, he hears the swan's song, and notice, it sometimes serves for music. How so? What's the speaker imagining? Where is he imagining himself to be?
With his friends?
Keep going. And they would be in a hall. So rather than think the story about Cadman, right? Bede tells us Cadman is part of a monastic community. And they're sitting around the refectory table one evening, and as was their custom apparently, beer's being passed around, and following the beer comes a harp. And when it comes to you, it's your turn to sing. Sings a song, passes the harp along. It's a sing-along kind of a thing. Okay? Comes to Cadman and he bolts. Why? He can't sing. Doesn't mean he sounds like Bob Dylan. I love Dylan. Dylan, you can't call what Dylan did singing, okay? Just you can't. It's not that. What does he mean? I don't get these old Germanic rules of alliteration. You know, each line has to have 4 stresses. The first stress in the second half line determines the stress in the first line, and they have to have alliteration, and the first stress of the half line, second half line determines the alliteration for the whole poem, and the fourth stress can never alliterate the whole 9 yards. Yeah, I saw eyes just go, okay? Cadman's like, I'm too dumb for that. He leaves, has a vision. Vision says, sing. He goes, I can't. Cadman, sing. Yes, Lord, what shall I sing? And he sings a song of creation. Okay? The important point is there's singing in the hall and there's music of the harp. That's why the harp gets mentioned several times. Gets mentioned lots in Old English literature. Only a couple have been discovered. Found in graves and things like that. So, the swan makes him think of the harp. The gannets call and the curlews cry for the laughter of men. You get enough beer going around and pretty soon what's going to start happening? Jokes and laughter and, people are having fun. Okay? The seagull singing for mead drink. I don't think he means I enjoyed the seagulls singing like I enjoy a good pint of ale. Probably not what he means. Probably more of the sound of glasses and tankards, not glasses, but tankards smacking against each other and such. These birds are his hall companions. This little boat, it's his hall. Metaphorically. Because what happens? Storms beat the stone cliffs. The tern, another bird, answers. Icy feathered, the eagle screams. Dewy feathered. No sheltering family could bring consolation to my desolate soul. The birds are nothing but birds. He doesn't have a what? Louder? Possibly. What doesn't he have to console his soul? Kin. No sheltering family. Notice it's not just no family. What's the speaker suggest family? You almost can't say this anymore in our society because of how screwed up we become. Families are supposed to what? Shelter. They're supposed to provide shelter. The word that's used there to bring consolation, that's that word frover again that we saw in The Wanderer. Solace, comfort, relief. Speaker's almost implying if that's the front door of home, then just walking in that front door should allow one to do what? Almost immediately. To just let everything out. To be totally at peace. And so, almost every time you get an and so, it's almost like you're beginning a gnomic passage. He who has tasted life's joy in towns, suffered few sad journeys, scarcely believes, proud and puffed up with wine, what I, weary, have often had to endure in my seafaring. Notice, who's he saying can't understand what I'm talking about? Us. Why? Because we are the he who has suffered few sad journeys, who has tasted life's joys in towns. Murfreesboro is a town. It's not, like New York or London or Paris or, Prague. But it is what it is. Scarcely believes, proud and puffed up with wine. That's drunk. The person who's drunk in the city Scarcely believes means will have difficulty. We'll find it impossible to believe. What? What I've suffered, what I've endured. The night shadow darkened. If I remember right, the Old English is the night shadow shadows. The noun is also used as a verb, or its verb form immediately follows. Snow comes from the north, frost binds the ground, hail falls on the earth, coldest of grains. Let me finish these last few lines real quickly. I know it's 11:05. And so they compelled me now what my heart thought. Now we won't do it. We don't have time. We'll pick up with, whatever the line is, 33 on Thursday. Unless I send a video talking about the rest of this poem. Because we'll get so far behind. Man.
Are you going to put up a quiz about it?
Yeah, I am going to go ahead and put up a quiz. I will post a video, but we'll finish it in class Thursday. I am going to put up a quiz for Wanderer and the Seafarer. It won't be due until, what's today? Today's Tuesday. Friday night. So we'll definitely finish it on Thursday.
So should we wait until after class Thursday?
If you want, you could, yeah, or you could watch the video I'll post, but I would say wait. I mean, it's only going to take you 10 minutes, probably.
Dr. Sherman?
Yes.
So I thought I was going to have to rearrange classes, but I got it worked out with work.
Okay.
So I'm here.
Okay.
So it's down and ready to go.
Okay, great. Did I stop that? No, I didn't.